Welcome to our video scribe. I'm Elle and I'm going to be talking you through one of our collecting diversity data tools. This scribe focuses on collecting service user data. In the Collecting Diversity Data toolbox, you can find general information on what diversity data is, why collect it, getting ready, and how to do it. But this scribe provides extra information and tips for collecting service user data. To help you collect service user data, we'll be talking you through embedding the questions in your services, examples of processes and embedding, how to prepare your people, and a frequently asked question. Let's start with embedding the questions in your services. By embedding the questions within your existing service practices, you will increase the data you collect because it will become second nature for your people to ask and seem like it's just part of the service to your service users. But what does that look like? Well, to truly understand the inclusivity of your services and what is driving your diversity data, it's important to ask at first point of contact. That way, you can track whether different groups of potential service users are more likely to join your service than others. So you should ask for diversity data alongside other information you ask for at first point of contact. You should continue to ask for the data throughout their journey as part of business as usual activity. For example, as part of annual service assessments. This is because some diversity data can change, for example whether you have a disability, and because during their journey your service users' trust may increase in why you're asking for the data and what you'll do with it. Then ask at close of service as part of your final communications. This is your last opportunity to gain up-to-date diversity data from service users. People may also be willing to share their data and provide feedback in relation to D&I when they're leaving you. We know that understanding the process for asking for diversity data isn't always that easy, and that everyone's services are different. So let's look at some examples of what it can look like in different services. If you have a helpline service, or people tend to call to make inquiries about your services, we don't recommend that your employee or volunteer asks the potential service user for their diversity data over the phone. This is because it's personal sensitive data, so people are unlikely to want to share it on the phone. And let's not forget, under GDPR, no one should have access to personal sensitive data unless they really need to. Instead, we recommend that your diversity data collection form is sent out after the call, as part of the standard follow-up information sent to potential service users. That way, it becomes just part of the way you do things, not a separate call-out. We've created a template script and a follow-up email that can be embedded in your existing communications to accompany the form. The template explains why diversity data is important to you and what you'll use the data for. Okay, now let's take a look at group services, or services available to the public without signing up first. You can ask attendees for their contact details to send the diversity data form as follow-up alongside other information you provide, or you can make the form available at the service. Ideally, the form would be provided alongside other data you collect and available online, for example, at the sign-in table on a laptop. That way, the service user can feel comfortable that their personal sensitive data will be protected. However, if these tools aren't available, you can provide service users with a paper form that can be placed in a confidential box. The details on the form will then need to be added to your service user data platform immediately, and the paper form disposed of appropriately. Again, we don't recommend this option, so you'll need to work with your data protection officer or specialist on this process to ensure you are GDPR compliant. These are just a couple of examples. All charity services are different, and so are all the people using the services. So we suggest providing flexibility in your processes and giving your people the power to judge if it's the right time to ask for diversity data or if it can wait till another time. That brings us on to preparing your people. This bit is probably the most important, because if your people don't understand why you're asking for the data or how to ask, then you're less likely to gather the data. So, who should you prepare? Well, any roles that will be involved in asking service users to complete the diversity form, any roles that may receive questions about the form, and any roles that may be inputting the data into your systems. Okay, so how should you prepare them? Start by making sure that your people have the right tools and support available to them, including providing your people with the opportunity to feedback on the process, questions, and communication templates before rolling them out. They may have ideas about how best to embed the questions. Making sure that they have the right tools they need. For example, you may want to use our communication templates and our diversity data FAQ template. Finally, it's a good idea to roll out a webinar to increase people's confidence in asking for the data. You can use our Collecting Service User webinar template to enable them to understand why you're asking for the data and what you'll do with it, recognize the right time to ask, have alternative ways of asking for the data, and finally, practice asking for the data. Last of all, we want to cover a question we're often asked. Does the service user have to complete the form themselves? The answer is yes, wherever possible. Ideally, service users should be able to complete the diversity data form online and by themselves. However, depending on the service user, there may be instances where they require support to complete the form. For example, if they're very young, do not have written English, or have a learning disability. In this case, it should be their key contact or support worker that helps them to complete the form so they feel comfortable. If they do require support, it's really important to remember that the key contact or support worker doesn't complete the form themselves or make any assumptions about the person's diversity group. For example, just because a person is married to a person of the opposite sex does not mean they're heterosexual. Another danger is assuming you know a person's ethnicity or religion just because of what they look like or because you know a family member. Another important aspect is not to ask a carer or family member to complete the form on their behalf. This could compromise their personal data rights, and the person may not have the right information about their diversity data, and ultimately, it could damage your relationship with the service user. Finally, if they require an interpreter, do not use a family member or carer as a translator, but instead use a volunteer or employee from the relevant community. We recognise that collecting service user data isn't easy, and it's different for every charity and service. So if you have a specific question about how to ask your service users for diversity data, just get in touch. Before we wrap up, let's recap. To ask service users for their data, you should embed asking for the data in the service user journey. Tailor the process for each of your services. Enable your people to ask for the data, and ensure that service users are providing the data themselves wherever possible. Head back to Charity Culture Catalyst to think about the next step in your diversity data journey.